we start talking about discrimination, we start talking about segregation, we start talking about Jim Crow, we start talking about apartheid, we start talking about police brutality. These are all symptoms of white supremacy.
The more insecure white men become, the more they feel a need to exert their superiority, their power and their force. And so the one obvious victim of white rage has always been black men.
White people actually love us. They really do. They want us here. They love us not in the sense that they respect us or want to treat us fairly, but they love us the way a master loves his dog.
And there's a big difference between being a slave and being enslaved, okay? Enslaved is mental, okay? Slave is physical.
If you look at black America and you look at black men and put them in two categories, there are those who are popular and then those who are great.
Racism is the raping of a continent, of a humanity of people, of materials and resources, and using them to enrich yourself and validating that for the rest of time.
Any black man who stands for his people, any black man who is against the white supremacist structure and is willing to stand by any means against any threats is indeed going to be considered a terrorist.
Because as long as African people were in charge of the planet, there was harmony. There was no wars between China, Japan, the American Indians, the Carib. As long as we were in control, there was harmony on the planet Earth.
You know, I often say when I lecture that the African that got on that boat is not the African that got off that boat.
When you conquer a civilization, you're actually conquering their God. Because what do? You change the name of God once you change their religion, once you change their culture.
There's a bitterness and an anger towards black people for not allowing themselves to remain in slavery so white people can feel privileged.
White supremacy is the only religion that isn't a religion. However, it is the most powerful religion on the planet.
At the Getty Museum out here in Los Angeles, there is a painting, an illustration from the 1400s, Moses defeating the Moors. And in the illustration, you see African people who are the Moors in Europe ruling. They're in a castle and they're battling white Europeans. And the reason why they named the painting Moses defeating the Moors is because the Europeans at the time, when they were going through the Inquisition, when they were going through the Reconquista, when they were getting the Africans called the Moors out of Europe, they had a religious undertone. And what they would do, they would draw stories from the Bible and tie that into their current struggle. And that's one of the things that gave them so much momentum. There was a religious undertone to it.
The Africans in Europe originally came out of the Moors, came out of North Africa, out of the area that's known as Morocco. Ruled that area called the Iberian Peninsula for centuries. And it's interesting because what most people don't realize is that the Moors had brought to Western Europe, before Europe even had developed the technologies to do a lot of the things that they had done. And when the Moors had been defeated in 1492, that expulsion of the Moors, they had moved into areas that were now considered Western Europe. But they brought with them a lot of the technology, the science, the astronomy, irrigation for being able to develop these lands. And that got erased out of history altogether. And I think that's part of the challenge now, is to put that knowledge back into the mainstream so that people understand who the Moors really were.
There's evidence of about 150 Moorish castles that are still there in Spain. And if you go to those castles, they will have a bilingual description where they will tell you this was a Christian castle, but it was originally a Moorish one, and they'll tell you when it was Moorish and then when it became Christian. The churches in Spain were originally mosques. They will tell you the period where they were originally mosques and which period they became churches.
The Moors then, when they came into Europe, they had already had elements of ancient African wisdom which allowed them to advance in ways that the Europeans had never imagined. And so in order to survive in this hostile environment, they had to go underground. The same thing happened with the Europeans, who also were close to the Moors and other Arabs who had pieces of this knowledge. They found that this information allowed them to reinterpret the history of the world, the science of the world, and that conflicted with Christians, specifically the Roman Catholic Church. So they also had to ban those people, and that led to the development of what we now call today secret societies, or more specifically, societies of secrets. And those secrets were the ancient educational knowledge that had been developed in Africa thousands of years earlier.
Islam will rise up in the course of history by the 6th century, will cut off Europe from world trade by dominating North Africa and the Middle East. Europe was cut off totally from Asia, India, and Africa in terms of trade and access to wealth. So Europe would plunge into what we call the Dark Ages. But it was an economic depression that led to a complete breakdown of society. When they break out of that, they break out with a vengeance that we will never, ever again be in this situation. That breakout comes in the 1400s with the Portuguese. And they will wreak vengeance on the rest of the world to control trade routes, economic territories. Where is the wheat grown? Where is the gold? Where is the barley? We will get control of these things because we will never be caught in the Dark Ages again.
In Cuba, they have a Spanish dish. It's called Moros y Cristianos, which means Moors and Christians. And this dish consists of white rice, which is the white Christians, and black beans, which represents the black Moors. So this theme of a racial battle disguised as a religious battle, that's still in popular culture today.
When you conquer a civilization, you're actually conquering their God. Because what do? You change the name of God once you change their religion, once you change their culture. So the name of God is based upon how you create God. In other words, my perception of God now rules.
It's initially about greed, but it's about greed coming from a culture. European culture has always been a war culture. Going back as far as you can go back to the farthest Germanic tribe, to the Vikings, the culture has been based on dominance, destruction, and death. And if you can carry that out against another people, you were the victor. They did not have a religious concept where the value of human lives was significant in the way Africa and Asia put human life first and dominance second.
The oldest human beings on this planet came from Africa. And as these Africans migrated out of Africa and traveled northward, they were trapped behind a wall of ice during the Wormian Ice Age 40,000 years ago. And through the process of speciation, they lost their melanin, became so-called European or Caucasian. But the other thing that's not often talked about is in losing the melanin, they also lost this quality that we refer to as the soul, this substance that civilizes you, helps you to see your fellow human being as a fellow human being. So now with the absence of the civilizing molecule, the civilizing substance, if you will, they saw people as objects to be found, discovered, controlled, manipulated, and wiped out, if necessary, in order to ensure your survival. So that is the driving force, and that's the major difference between the two groups of people.
Neely Fuller came out with a book called The Compensatory Code Concept, which he introduced the idea of white supremacy being a religion. And by saying that white supremacy is a religion, that means that it's a belief that's backed up by power, that's backed up by action, and that action and power negatively affects people who are of melanated descent.
The relationship between black and white Americans, it's almost like an abusive marriage where each partner needs the other one. You know, a husband that beats his wife, sometimes he may love his wife. He don't want her to leave. He wants her to stay in the relationship and keep getting beat. You know, and she may also be codependent as well and really love her husband, be more loyal than a woman who's being treated well down the street. Why? Because she knows, in her mind, she knows her place. And her place is not one of dominance, it's one of subjugation.
The genetic signature and the mind of the genetics has the will to continue, and that it becomes strongest when puberty hits. The will to continue to procreate becomes so strong that you would kill for it. So the genetics of a man who, in his mind, fears the death of that thing that makes him unique, he will become as vicious as necessary to save and preserve that?
Well, Sheikh Anta Diop teaches us about the sun people and the ice people. So what gave them the momentum is psychological disposition that came out of that ice age. So for sun people, African people, what was their psychological disposition? Living in the warmth, very little clothing, could just go outside and pick a fruit, as Dr. Ben would say, because there was this abundance. Whereas for ice people living in the caves and hills through the ice age, developing that disposition, the first thing they had to go out and do is kill.
Imagine if a group of battle-hardened soldiers from Vietnam who've been in Nam for 10 years, walked into a church where everybody's loving and hugging and being peaceful. Who's going to win that battle? Who's going to eventually dominate that church? The soldiers are, because they're going to come with weapons. They're ready to fight. They've gone through hell. They've got battle tactics in hand. The people in the church may not even know they're in a war. That's what I see when I look at Europeans versus the rest of the world. Europeans have treated the world horrifically. We know that. What they've done in Africa, in South America, North America, etc. But if you keep going further back, you look at how they treated each other, it's astonishing. I mean, they basically had about 1,000 years of complete ignorance, savagery, self-destruction, community destruction.
We also got to be very clear about the terms we use, because when I use the term white supremacy or white supremacist, that's not to say that all white people are racist or all white people are white supremacists. That's incorrect. But the people who do choose to practice white supremacy are more powerful than the ones who are not. And a white supremacist is someone who believes through speech, thought, or action that they should be in a superior position over people who are non-white.
When you're constantly at war, your battle tactics are going to be stronger. You're going to have more weapons and more advanced weapons. So they then take this this ideology, as well as this weaponry, as well as this skill set into the world, and they go to places where resources are plentiful, so you're not fighting for territory necessarily in Africa or in North America. Native Americans really were not big on the idea of even trying to own land. Like, no, the land is here. The land's for everybody. The buffalo, there's plenty of buffalo. Just kill what you need, right? So you've got people kind of with this mindset that's not prepared for this sort of, savage, battle-hardened mentality. So it's really easy prey for the Europeans.
Well, as it relates to domination on a physical level, as it relates to torture, murder, mayhem, as it pertains to a society that has no order and arrangement, then they would have some form. If you look at the word dominance, they would have the word dominance. The question is, as it relates to honor, integrity, and dignity, is that the type of dominance that you want? If you want to create the type of society that inbred is about to implode on itself because of the nature of the conditions you've put on people, then you would have to use the word dominant, and I would use the word dominant. But if you're looking for the society that I believe is balanced within the forces of nature, then they are not dominant. In fact, they are inferior to the fact, because eventually nature is going to take back what they attempted to steal. You cannot cancel the future. You can only postpone it.
One thing that the white supremacists learn how to do is pretend to practice certain religions that other melanated people practiced all around the world, but their real religion is white supremacy when you peel the layers back. Because when you look at all of the religions, all of them are dominated by white supremacy now. So what's the real religion? The real religion is white supremacy.
Through this religion of white supremacy, the closer you are in complexion to this ruling entity, then the higher you are up in the pyramid. And so when Europeans left Europe and came to America, they had an opportunity now to be higher up on that pyramid. And so once they got here, A poor man in Europe, a poor Irishman, Irishmen were looked upon by Europeans as the niggers of Europe. But they can come to America and they can amass power, wealth, and respectability. As a matter of fact, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and those guys, they wouldn't have made it in Europe, but they can come here and adapt that same mentality and then open the door for other poor Europeans to come here and benefit from whiteness.
So the Rahowa is a term that means racial holy war. It was popularized by a white extremist named Ben Klassen. Now also Ben Klassen, he wrote a book called The White Man's Bible, where he goes into great detail about how to eliminate the so-called mud people, meaning black people. So these white supremacists, they have all types of doctrines and code words and books and paraphernalia and information out here on how to subjugate black people and non-white people around the planet.
Christianity that is being reintroduced to Africa is worthless to Africa. The Islam that is being introduced to Africa and used still as a form of slavery in Eastern Africa is worthless to Africa.
Africa created all of the world's religions, from agnostic to Zoroastrianism, came out of the mind of Africa. So the idea of the missionary, and this is the piece that we always have to look at, because when they first came to Africa, those of Eurasian descent, they did not come physically. They came spiritually. And when they came spiritually and they got the indigenous peoples to embrace their faith system, then came the teachers that then indoctrinated them from an educational perspective. And after they had your mind and after they had your spirit, the physicalness was only a mop-up operation.
Throughout history, people who have been captured have always been allowed to convert to the religion of their captors. But black people have not been allowed to do that. Black people have been trying to do that for the last 500 years. Black people have been trying to convert to what they think is the religion of the oppressor, which is Christianity. But that's not the religion of the oppressor. The religion is white supremacy, because if it was Christianity, the churches that we see today would not be the most segregated places in the planet. Church is the most segregated place in the world. You have black churches and you have white churches. If you're a Christian, there should not be a black church and a white church. There should just be a church. So if we have white churches and black churches, the reason why we have a black church is because we have a white church, and we have a white church because we have white supremacy. So white supremacy must be the real religion.
1822, when Champollion deciphered hieroglyphics, it made it possible for the first time in about 1,300 years that people could now go into Kemet and read the writings, the Medu-Neter, on the temples and on the papyri. And once they began to read that writing, they began to understand that everything that they had been teaching Christianity is a lie and based on African concepts that had been created thousands of years earlier.
In the Bible, they have a Genesis story. And the Genesis story said in the beginning, God was the Word, and the Word was God, and God created the water and the land and the darkness and the light and the human, and etc. Well, that story almost paralleled the story in the coffin text and the book of the coming forth by day, which we call the Book of the Dead. They also have a Genesis story, almost word for word, like the Christian Genesis story. So actually, when you look at Christianity, it is a warmed over version of Kemetic theocracy.
One example is a book called the Book of Amenemope, which is an instruction text written by the ancient Egyptians. And that instruction text was copied word for word as Proverbs 22 and 23.
14 words, that's a doctrine and that's a slogan by white extremists all around the world. That means we must secure the existence of our race and a future for white children. And this is a slogan that they use, and it's a code that they use. So whenever you see white extremist groups who have the number 14 tattooed on their arm or anywhere on their bodies, that's what they're referencing. They're referencing this code 14 along with the number 88. The 88, that's a number that represents the letter H, because H is the 8th letter of the alphabet, and the H means Hail Hitler. So these are little code words that the white supremacists send to each other.
The Bible itself, when you look at the word, comes from the word Byblos. And Byblos was the capital of what we call Phoenicia, which today is Lebanon. And when the Greeks went to rewrite the books of their teachers, the African peoples of Kemet, they went to Byblos to get their paper to write and rewrite the books. And when they did that, the name of the book became the place where they got their paper to buy the book.
Religion comes at the end of a sword or at the end of swords, where everybody's been decimated and brutally annihilated. You know, and after that type of brutality, you'll accept anything. And your conqueror can tell you your gods don't exist, because look at you, you're dead and in the street.
Once that Catholic Church breaks away, the church moves into the dominance when we see Constantine arise as an arm of a military government. So the Catholic Church then becomes the rationale, the theological rationale for imperialism and dominance.
If you look at a cathedral, a Catholic cathedral, if you're looking at it properly, you know you're looking at a fortress. They had towers at the end, and at the top they had this bell to warn the sentries, this warning when attack is coming. It is nothing but a fort. But to us, a Catholic cathedral is a church. But it is a military fort. That's why they have the tower up there for the sentry to ring it when they're coming for the attack. That's why they ring the bell.
One tool of the white supremacists is to use what I call the 3 M's. The first M is the missionaries. The missionaries go in there first, and they con people. They go in there and act like they're part of some type of religious organization, and they appeal to the spirituality of melanoid people. And the second thing they do is bring in the merchant class. After the missionaries come in, they say, we need to bring in our products, we need to bring in our people to sell things and to use some of the resources here. And then the third thing they bring in are the military. They bring the military in to then subjugate and take over the land and decimate the people for centuries to come.
If you have anything, it has to be bipolar. If you have a church, you better have a military. If you have a store, you better have a military. You can call it security if you want. Everything comes with the male principle. And we have a church, but no military. See, when you build that church, you gotta have a military. You should build a military and a church at the same time. It has to be bipolar.
Religion's always the tool that's used. It's being used right now. You know, that's one of the main strategies used to conquer a people, is to destroy their religion, make them question their own spirituality, destroy the cultural artifacts that go along with it. That's the way. There's a book called The Grand Chessboard by Brzezinski, who once was he was the foreign policy advisor to Jimmy Carter. And what he told him was, if you want to take over a people, you destroy their culture and you destroy their religion and you destroy the artifacts that they create.
As the world expands, meaning our involvement in the rest of the world by Europe, sees that the world of color makes up 3/4 of the planet. So you need some troops. So the white-skinned non-whites, you're going to attach them to you. So you're going to make them honorary Caucasians. So now Jews are honorary Caucasians. Irish are honorary Caucasians. Italians are honorary Caucasians. Eastern Europeans are now honorary Caucasians. That means you're now honorary Germanics.
White supremacy, again, is a religion, and other races of people are converted into that religion because people can't really define what a white person is genetically. See, it gets real tricky when you try to talk about what is whiteness from a genetic standpoint, because certain people who are white today were not white 50, 60 years ago. The Irish were not white during the 1800s. They became white. They were allowed to be white later on. Many Italians and Greek people, they were not considered white until later on. Jewish people, many of them were not considered white till later on. So what happens is the white supremacists, when they feel that numbers are dwindling, they allow other groups to convert into whiteness. And in order to convert, they make it their duty to take on the mindset where they want to mistreat and subjugate people who are non-white.
Magazine has these cool pieces, and they did a piece where you rent a white person in China. You rent a white person. So there's a former New York City police officer, doesn't know diddly about doodle, gets up, gives a speech at a medical conference to Asian people who really are doctors. But because he's white and because he speaks proper English, meaning white English, he's always gonna have a job.
After the 1960s, after 1965 in particular, when black people were fighting for civil rights, the white supremacists wanted to create a backlash against that, so they allowed different immigrant groups to come over to the United States with the Immigration Act of 1965. And one group that they allowed to be the model minority were Asians. We started to see an influx of Asian, Korean, all types of people come in, and then the white supremacists started to hold the Koreans and Asian groups up and saying, hey, look at these people, they just got here, they're doing better than those black folks. It was somewhat of a way to shame the black population by holding up the Asian population and looking at them and pretending that they were the model minority, when just years before, Asian people were mocked and subjugated just like other groups. If you look at media back before the 1960s or before the 1970s, they would portray Asian people with glasses and buck teeth and with the Fu Manchu, walking around being silly and goofy.
If you come from anywhere in North Africa, don't care how black you are Caucasian. Until the 1970s, if you came from Trinidad, you were Caucasian. I remember when I first saw it, an ironic, beautiful lady. I get out of the military, I get a job at the post office. I'm doing mail across from this magnificently beautiful sister. So I'm trying to, brother, trying to make a play. And she told me she don't deal with black folks. She don't speak to black people. So I'm like, girl, what's wrong with you? She said, because I'm Caucasian. And she left the job, went home on lunch, got her passport and brought it back to me. In the passport, it said this black woman was a Caucasian. And so the psychology of white supremacy that used dominance and terror and fear, psychological fear, spiritual fear, physical fear, and tyranny to make people become addicted to wanting to identify with them just to feel safe.
One way the white supremacists have been able to dominate and subjugate melanated people around the planet is by controlling the education, by controlling the knowledge, and controlling the knowledge of history. Because if you don't know yourself, you don't know how to empower yourself. If you don't know your history, you won't know your future. And the white supremacists have been very meticulous in erasing the history of African people and inserting themselves into that history.
The Greeks were the last race of people that the Egyptians passed the arcane knowledge on to. That's where this Greek to me came from. They were the last ones that the Egyptians gave that to. It took 3 generations of Greeks under Egyptian rulership that they could finally find one that they could teach.
Now, the Egyptians call their land Kemet, and they use a piece of charcoal, a burnt piece of wood as charcoal, to symbolize what they mean, the blackest black. And all of their carvings of themselves, they paint their skins dark brown or black. They have white paint, red paint, yellow paint, but they paint themselves blacks. How anyone in the world, with so much information available for the public to see, can even be under any illusions that the Egyptian was even light-skinned.
Just when you look at climate and weather, if you go to Egypt, you will notice that the weather is quite hot. And you will notice that it is almost impossible to be able to be outside dressed the way the carvings on the walls are as it relates to the people. Because you would get melanoma before we even knew melanoma existed. So they could not have been depigmented or less pigmented. They have to have been heavily pigmented.
So what we have then is various eyewitness descriptions where people visited Egypt and they left an account of the Egyptians in their texts. So what you have is people like Herodotus, who describes them as black-skinned and woolly-haired. Galen, who describes them as having short, black, dry, and brittle hair.
Not to mention, as Dr. Clark has taught us, where in the world did they do what they did in Africa? He used to say, are you telling me that Eurasians came out of Europe and built Africa up, but never went back to Europe to develop their civilizations the way they did in Africa? Or does it make sense that it was built up in Africa and it was sporadically brought across the globe to China and to Iraq and to Iran and into Europe where you have the Stonehenge? Would that make better sense? So the answer is, there is no question at this point.
Many of the artifacts that are on display in many of the Egyptian collections around the world are fakes.
Nefertiti statue is of doubtful authenticity. That's a posh way of saying it's almost certainly a fake. A number of scholars have come out quite recently. Henri Sterling in Switzerland, he's come out and said, listen, this is a 100-year forgery.
If there is hundreds of paintings of Nefertiti and all of them are black, all of the statues in the Cairo Museum of Nefertiti is black, only this one little white statue in Germany is white. Something's wrong with that picture.
Marx was instructed to use the face of Ludwig's wife, Emily Brochard. So the face that supposedly was the most beautiful face of ancient history is actually the features of Ludwig Brochard's wife, Emily Brochard. So now, that's not even the half of it. Beautiful statue, came out of the ground. No, it didn't come out of the ground. What happened was Brochard was forced to bring it forward after 11 years. So what did he do? He took the head that Marx made, went back to the Tel Al-Amar site, covered it up with dirt, and came out and had a photo op as if that's how he found it.
One common lie and misconception that many white supremacists like to promote is that the African people didn't invent the wheel, that African people were just primitive, living in West Africa, waiting on the white supremacists to come save them. But in Africa, especially in the area that we now know as southern Libya, right in the Saharan desert, there were rock paintings of black Africans on chariots, and you can see the wheel, and these paintings go back 7,000 years.
In 951 AD, there was a scholar called Ibn Hawqal, and he wrote a book. And in his book, he describes two things. The first is visiting a fringe city of ancient Ghana called Aldagast. And he witnessed a merchant writing another merchant a check for 42,000 golden dinars. Now that should blow people's heads clean off. West Africa had checks 951 AD. The second thing he describes is that the emperor of Ghana was the richest king on the face of the earth.
There is a city known as Eredo, E-R-E-D-O, that's located in Nigeria, that the brilliant scholar Robin Walker is coming out with information dealing with the idea that this, in Nigeria, is a city that is 400 square miles in elliptical shape, and the ramparts or the gates are 70 feet high, or what might be considered to be maybe a 7-story building. That's how big it is. And that was done somewhere in the 800s to 1000 AD. At the same time, 400 years later, in the 1400s and the 1500s, where folk are saying these people are primitive, this city exists in Nigeria.
Once Britain burned the palace and they colonized the region and then renamed it Nigeria, it wasn't called that before, they did not permit the Oba, that's the emperor of Benin, to rebuild the palace. So consequently, what's there now is the tiny fraction that escaped being burned down.
We look at cities that were larger than cities in Europe at that time. We look at cities that had the equivalent of ancient skyscrapers, buildings that were 4 or 5 stories tall. We look at cities with streets. We look at cities with sewer systems. We look at cities, nations that had universities, that had libraries, that had a upper class, a solid middle class, architects, engineers, physicians, dentists, a city that would rival any other city in the world at that time.
Well, the emperor of Ghana, we know, lived in a castle with glass windows. We know this because there's an 1153 AD document that tells us that there were glass windows.
We've got Kano in parts of Nigeria. We've got the great Chad Basin civilizations. We got civilizations along the Congo that we don't even talk about. And what's ironic, in the 1700s, and you can actually go online and find some of them, the Europeans who go to the Congo come back home and draw pictures, which is in their museums, of these magnificent metropolis, these cities with streets laid out in grids and paved. They found the same thing in Benin. They found the same thing in Kumasi. But these same Europeans, especially the British and the French, will burn and sack most of these cities.
A Polish scholar called Z.R. Dmytrowski did a survey of Nigerian ancient monuments and wrote 3-volume architectural book called An Introduction to Traditional Nigerian Architecture, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. Now, that's important, you see, because most people wouldn't have thought that Nigeria had anything to be able to fill 3 volumes. Which brings me on to Benin. Benin is in the southern part of Nigeria. Now, Benin's architecture was very famous in medieval times. In particular, its royal palace. Its royal palace was the same size as whole European cities, just the palace.
Ethiopia was one of the earliest countries to embrace Christianity, right? And so what you have in Ethiopia is a ancient civilization. You know, Ethiopia, we got to remember, Ethiopia is the source of the Blue Nile, right? And based on research that I'm looking at now, I'm really beginning to realize that Kemet is Ethiopia's oldest daughter. So the knowledge that flowered in Kemet began first in Ethiopia.
They never occupied and dominated and conquered Ethiopia totally. And that's because King Menelik understood he needed more than just spirituality, because a lot of the Africans in other parts of Africa, they depended on their spiritual system. But when you're dealing with a group of people like the white supremacists who are not spiritual at all, you're going to lose. So King Menelik, he used his spirituality, but he understood that he had to be practical. So King Menelik, he got guns that rivaled the guns of his enemies. And when the Italians came into Ethiopia to try to defeat him, King Menelik used his guns and used his weaponry to fight them off.
What Ethiopia was able to achieve was nothing short of military genius. They struggled certainly with Italy for maintaining their independence. But I think what they were able to do was to use the land to their advantage. They were able to strategize, and they really outthought the enemy. And they were underestimated, let's face it. I think they were their military power was underestimated.
And so when you had all of this in the psyche of a people, this notion of empire and kingdoms and defending ourselves against the Greek army, the Roman army, the Turkish army, the Persian armies, what's some little rinky-dink Italians? We can handle this, and they handled it.
And when King Menelik in Ethiopia defeated the Italians, what's interesting, the Western media started to portray King Menelik as a white man. So this man was clearly a black African brother. There was pictures of him in the whole nine, but the Western media started to show cartoons and images of him as being white because they didn't want to let the world see that the Europeans had been defeated by this African man.
Traditional African religions, particularly the one from ancient Egypt and Sudan, venerated this idea called Ma'at. And Ma'at, roughly speaking, you could translate it as truth, as justice, as righteousness, as reciprocity. The problem is when you're being attacked by people who don't believe any of that, and you are trying to do the Ma'atic thing, they will beat you, unfortunately. And this is one of those harsh lessons that the black community is still to learn.
The assumption that another group's view of humanity is the same as ours. The assumption that another group's understanding of divinity is the same as ours. The African moved from the premise that everybody was a brother, and thus should be treated and accorded that kind of brothership and brotherhood. The European moved from a position that what is mine, and what is yours is mine if I can take it. You had a war culture coming in contact with an agrarian culture. The war culture is always going to win because the war culture doesn't put any value on human life. And that means it has no barometer to how much death and destruction it will carry out.
People talk about the greatness of Africa, and we see some of the great empires that we had over in Africa. And naturally, a lot of people will say, okay, if we had all these great empires, where did Africa go wrong? There's several situations that happened. One thing that happened with Africa, you had Mansa Musa. Now, Mansa Musa, according to most historians, West African black man who was a king in the area that we know as Mali and Timbuktu, the wealthiest man to ever live. And Mansa Musa's situation was a gift and a curse, because Mansa Musa, he went around the world basically just giving out gold. This man had so much money, he could give money away. And he gave so much money out, it decimated certain economies in other nations. So it showed the humanity of the African people and the generosity of the African people, but you showed people that you had all of this wealth, so now people are plotting on you. So when people saw Mansa Musa giving out all that money, he became lunch to everybody else. So Africa started to get raided and flooded with all types of people trying to take advantage of the wealth and the resources that were in Africa.
The tide rises and falls. I mean, what are we talking about? We're not supposed to be a victim of time. When you're going into Africa when it was falling, when it was old and worn out, trying to nurture and educate the East Indians, the Chinese, and the Europeans. We were trying to help all of these people to raise them up to a higher level, and they wore us out. Even today, you'll get worn out if you talk to a certified Negro under warranty. They will wear you out.
We didn't take military matters seriously. We didn't take warfare seriously. And I'm aware that the propaganda where the West presents such as the Zulus as a highly militaristic nation. Unfortunately, we needed a lot more Zulus and a lot more people on that militaristic thing, because historically that's where we were weak.
I don't know why Nubia fell, besides all nations fall. Rome fell, Greece fell, the current empires you're in are going to fall and new superpowers are going to come. So yeah, we failed. Kings died. Other people mishandled money. The same thing that happened with your grandmama inheritance after she died. The same thing. Some of your cousins went and wilded out with it. The other of your cousins took it and created their own little things. Same thing happened, but the question is, how do we create in Israel? How do we create in India? How do we create a Germany? How do we create something for us? Because we need something. You know, Dr. John Henry Clark was like, we're yelling that we want a nation, and it's nation time, and we don't even know how to build a train. The Japanese bought one train, reverse engineered that train, now they're selling trains. Any nation fails is you don't want it to fall again. So ultimately, if I wanted to find out why any black nation failed, I would go to the most recent one, because the most recent one works by our recent standards of governing and governance, and that would be Haiti. Why did Haiti fail? Haiti was sabotaged by France. Haiti was looted, and she was sanctioned globally.
Haiti offered any blacks anywhere in the hemisphere, from the Dominican Republic, the United States, if you can escape from slavery and get here, you're a free man, and we protect the integrity of your freedoms. That is what the anger against Haiti was about. Haiti was the first free republic that offered freedom to any enslaved people, black or white, from anywhere. If you make it to these lands, our army will protect your integrity.
For 444 years of the European enslavement of African people, you had the best and the brightest of African people steadily taken out. And then after that genocide, after that Holocaust, Europeans decided that they were going to go in now after the Berlin Conference and control the land for another 88 years. So Africa has only been free for less than 50 years, but is still suffering from the ravages of 444 years of slavery, 88 years of colonization. You don't recover from that automatically unless there are plans in place to aid your recovery. After Europe was destroyed during World War I and World War II, you had the Marshall Plan and other plans that were implemented by the United States in order to rebuild Europe. Look at photographs of London, photographs of Paris after the war, after the bombing. And then see what American aid did 20 years later to rebuild those cities. So we think that Europe has always looked like that. No, Europe has had more wars than Africa has had. But but they've had access to resources to rebuild. Africa hasn't had the ability to rebuild.
There was no revolution there. There was no independence granted. All they were done was to make a few Negroes wealthy, and then y'all managed the apartheid poverty for us. But we'll keep all of our banks, we'll keep all of our mines, we'll keep all of our industry. We're not sharing nothing with you. We'll keep the best 80% of the farmland, and you can't even come into our little towns. There are towns in South Africa we don't know the names of. That's the most prosperous, most beautiful places in the world. White folks are retiring from Europe every day, especially the aristocrats going there to live. And they make us think South Africa is Johannesburg.
Colonial powers of Europe left African nations. They took everything, even the light bulbs. They ripped up the train tracks. They said, if we're leaving, we're going to make sure that you won't be able to sustain yourself. And they destroyed everything. It's no different than what happened in America after emancipation.
When they left, they destroyed all. Guinea is one of the classic cases. They even took the toilet paper. They took everything out of Guinea. And then, from the international marketplace, fought to keep Guinea from ever developing international trade with Europe. Guinea has the largest supply of iron ore in the world. Who do you think control and own it? Some Israeli mega capitalists.
You know, your 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Those numbers that we have are, people call them Arabic numerals. They're not Arabic, they're Hindu. But the mathematicians that introduced me to Europe were, in fact, African mathematicians. The fraction bar, where you've got, 2 fraction 7 and the fraction bar, that was something that was invented by an African mathematician. Some of the most advanced maths textbooks during the period were again written by Moorish mathematicians. Where it comes to the areas of astronomy, where it comes to areas such as navigation, map making, and so on. So there was a Moorish geographer called El-Idrisi, and he was the one that said in his book that the world is as round as a sphere, and the waters are held to it by what he calls natural equilibrium. You can work out what he really means, gravity. And he says that the world is divided into 360 degrees. Now, this was 1153. And then that gives you some idea of what kind of intellects we're talking about.
Guinea was the French word, the European word for West Africa. So, and all of Africa at some point was called Guinea. And so when they get in the Pacific, they see all these black folks, so they say, okay, this is the New Guinea. That's why it's called New Guinea. You got New Caledonia, you got Vanuatu, you had Australia. These are all African populations. Easter Island is off of the coast of South America, going into the Pacifics. And all of the statues there are statues of African images.
The statues in Easter Island, they look identical to ancient face masks that's from West Africa. Also in Easter Island, there's an ancient script called Rongo Rongo, and this writing looks identical to African hieroglyphics. Also, there's an East African tribe called the Rongo tribe. Also, there's another very remote Pacific island called Nukuhiva. Now, this place is in the middle of nowhere, but there are statues on this island that look identical to ancient statues that are in Nigeria. So we definitely have evidence of an African presence in some of the most remote places around the globe.
You know, the Mammy Monument came on the heels of the creation of the Lincoln Memorial. Lincoln Memorial was built in 1922, right? So it was a memorial in honor of the 16th president, the first president of the United States to be assassinated. Abraham Lincoln, the man who brought on the Civil War, the man who was responsible for ending slavery, and he was assassinated for that. So a decision was made to build this memorial to honor Abraham Lincoln. And as a result, the backlash from Southern politicians was to now find a way to undo all of the celebration regarding making Abraham Lincoln a hero. And that idea was to create a Mammy Monument to honor those blacks who submitted to slavery in order to present a counterpoint to Abraham Lincoln.
what stopped that whole Mammy movement, because they weren't just talking about putting the statue up in Washington, they were trying to put the statues up all across the South in every major capital in the South. They wanted one of these types of statue, and with this rationale. But it was the black newspaper and the black community that rose up, and the NAACP that then got with the liberals in government to crush that movement, because they were serious about doing this.
When we think about the concept of aviation, we think about the Wright brothers, and then if we go back, we think of people like Da Vinci, who had drawings about flight, and a lot of people try to say that Da Vinci's drawings were the first ones that talked about people flying. But there was a Moor in Spain in around the year 875, at the height of the Moorish conquest of Spain. And Ibn Firnas was one of the first people to test out flight and navigation. At the Iraqi airport, there's a statue of Ibn Firnas that's paying homage to his knowledge of aviation and flight.
Mike Hollis, who I interviewed years ago with Air Atlanta, I mean, he was a young brother. I mean, he was barely in his 40s, you know, late 30s, early 40s, and saw a need, got the investment dollars, and launched, you know, Air Atlanta. But you had Piedmont Airlines, which was out of, you know, North Carolina, Southern Virginia area, Tennessee area, in which a group of black investors were about to make a play on it. So this whole aviation sector isn't new to us. I mean, there's so much opportunity out there.
Air Atlanta was an airline that was owned by a black man down in Atlanta. Very high-class airline. This airline, they had it for a couple of years in the 80s, and the airline had all first-class seats. They would serve on fine china. So this was a top-notch airline that a lot of folks don't know about, that was owned by black men. Rene Lacoste is the designer of the Lacoste shirts that we see now today. That's still a very high-end clothing line that we see in high-end stores all around the world. Now, a lot of people don't know that Rene Lacoste was a black man who lived in France, and he was a tennis player. They called him the alligator because he would just decimate his opponents. And his father was white, but his mother was black Jamaican sister. And they kept that quiet. They still kind of keep that quiet to this day. You don't hear too much about his mother. But Lacoste is a black man, and a lot of folks don't know when you wear the Lacoste clothes, you're wearing the clothes of a brother who designed that. One thing, the white supremacists, they try to make it seem like racism is just a Southern thing. They're very good at telling that lie. But when you look around the country, certain places were not just segregated, black people were just not allowed. For example, out in the West, Oregon, black people were not even allowed to live in Oregon until the 1920s. Black people couldn't come there at all. It wasn't no segregation, you just weren't supposed to be there. People in England did not start shampooing until the late 1700s. And the reason they started to shampoo is a brother named Sheikh Deen Muhammad, who's a melanoid brother out of India who went into Europe. He introduced shampoo to Europe.
You know, I go to Europe a lot, and I perform there. And one of the most interesting things to me is when I go there, the same way when you're here and you walk around in American airports, you see travel agencies telling you should go to Mexico, you should go to South America, you should go to the Caribbean. They advertise everywhere they conquered in the Western Hemisphere. When you go to Europe, they tell you should go to Africa. And they show you these islands, and I'm sitting there as a black man like, damn. Like, they never tell us to go to Africa, but they conquered it, and they conquered it so solely that it's a resort to them.
Statement that Count Volney made in his book, Ruins of Empire, is very interesting, where, in paraphrasing it, he's saying, you know, the very people we are now enslaving in the Caribbean and in Africa are the very creators of this society and this great civilization that we are emulating and attempting to bring back into Europe. Because when you look at the Eiffel Tower is an obelisk or a tekenu placed upon a mur or a pyramid, except it's only skeletal. When you look at the Arc de Triomphe in France, that is in every temple that you go to in Kemet. So that they were actually stealing ideas from people that they were attempting to enslave.
North Sentinel Island, that's an island that's right in the Bay of Bengal. That's right between India and Asia, right off the coast of Thailand. And this island, the people have been there for over 60,000 years. Now, these are jet black people. These are deep melanated people. And these black people, they've been on this island for years, and they are the only people on the planet that have never been subjugated by the white supremacists. And the reason why they've never been subjugated by the white supremacists is because they got one code. The minute you step on North Sentinel Island, they will kill you on sight. It will slit your throat, no questions asked. Well, they're primitive, they're backwards people, they're Stone Age people, but one thing they can say is that they are not dominated by the white supremacists. So to me, that makes them some of the smartest black people on the planet. One part of the religion of white supremacy is to sacrifice certain people and sacrifice their lives for the sake of your religion, to show your dominance in your religion. And this is what the white supremacists, they do with melanoid people all around the world.
We are this beast that they are afraid of, and they have to destroy in order to protect themselves, protect their women, by extension, protect their country. So the more white folk in America become a minority, the more afraid they're going to be, the more reactionary they're going to be, and the more they're going to see a need to circle the cultural wagons and take us out. This is their last stance. And to be perfectly honest with you, if you really understand the essence of white supremacy, they have to do that. In their minds, they have to do that, because to submit is to die. So they are like a caged animal or animal that's been trapped in a corner. They're going to do everything within their power to survive. And if we understand that and understand this is the mentality that we're dealing with, then our reaction has to be a different reaction. You know, we can't react to everything that they do if we understand their mindset. We have to know how not to provoke them, but there are other things that we could be doing and should be doing in order to maximize our presence, right? And take back our power so that we neutralize them just by our very presence.
In order to maintain a system of supremacy, you have to also maintain that people stay in a position. And if they get too far ahead or make too many forward advances, there's a fear that we're going to lose control. I've even had people say to me, well, if we give, in quotes, black people everything they're asking for, then we will be out of control.
During the Jim Crow era, and this just goes to show how sick the white supremacists are, because black people, we don't understand that they will harm our children just like they'll harm us. And they would have something called the Battle Royale, where they would go get black children who were in an economically deprived situation that was created by the white supremacists, because remember, they create economic deprivation. So they get these people who are economically deprived, and then they offer them scraps in order to entertain themselves. So they would get these black children and take them to these boxing matches that you had a lot of white supremacists watching and paying to see, and watch these kids beat each other up.
Where they blindfold young black males, and it could be any amount of them from 3, 4 to 5 to 10, and they're put in a ring or a circle, and they have to fight until the last man standing. So they just beat each other nearly to death, hoping to get whatever little rewards or favor that will come at the end of the day with who was left standing. And that was called the Battle Royal. Jack Johnson came out of that process of the Battle Royal. Our great black heavyweight, first black heavyweight champion of the world, came out of that process down in Galveston, Texas, where he grew up. And that was all through the South as an entertainment mode for white folks to watch black young kids beat themselves into a frenzy while blindfolded, with the hope that they won't get hurt at the end of the day, killed at the end of the day, or might get some pittance of a reward that they could take home and help their families.
When we look at circus clowns, especially the hobo clown, the sad-faced clown with the ripped-up clothes, that came from the white supremacists making fun of black people. At around 1874, there were these two white men who were minstrel show artists, McIntyre and Heath. And in 1874, you remember this is directly after the Civil War. When the Civil War was over, a lot of black people were homeless and destitute, and they would have to ride boxcars and trains all around the country looking for work, and they would wear tattered clothes, and they were just poor, begging, and just trying to do whatever they needed to do to survive. And living in a culture of white supremacy, the white supremacists looked at that and said, okay, that's something that we can make fun of. So these two white minstrel show entertainers, they started to dress up in tattered clothes and paint their faces black, and they had these big white exaggerated lips with a sad look on it, because black people were sad at that time after the Civil War because they were destitute. And they made a mockery of this and went around the world and went around the country doing these minstrel shows. And eventually that image went into the circuses, where circus clowns started to do that. And even to this day, you still have these circus clowns with the dark faces and the big white exaggerated lips and the tattered clothes and the holes in the shoes. And that hobo clown image that we see today in circuses all around the world is basically still mocking black people.
There's a pride that comes when you've trained the animal, the same way you train a big elephant and you take him to the circus, and you make the elephant do little tricks, and because you control the elephant's mind since birth, you've intimidated the elephant to the point where he thinks that you're actually the superior one in this relationship, when really he could crush you with 1 foot. And that starts at a very early age. You start by shocking him every time he gets out of line. You reward him when he behaves properly. That's exactly what they do to young black men. They are training us like circus animals from a very early age, so that later on there is this pride in showing off the trained animal. Like, look at how high that nigga can jump. Look at how fast that nigga can run, right? But when the animal gets out of line, when the elephant decides he wants to kill the trainer, or he just starts to lose it for whatever reason, what do? They kill him. They take him out.
There's another game that the white supremacists used to play at carnivals called the African Dodger, where they would get a black person and have him stick his head in a hole, and they would throw baseballs at him and try to see who can hit him in the head. And this was entertainment to the white supremacists. Anything that will harm black people has always been entertainment to the white supremacists. This is why lynching was entertainment to the white supremacists. Even to this day, seeing black children get murdered in the streets by the white supremacists with impunity, that's entertainment. This is why these people who do it, they get paid, they get big donation money to harm black people.
Black people who are getting into, jihadism and all kinds of foolishness, where you end up fighting other people's battles, fighting other people's issues, and not actually trying to stand together as black people, is really, really embarrassing.
It's almost for black people, when we analyze our existence, we're seeing ourselves in our pain, but we don't dare mention the fact that white people are causing this pain, and we don't dare mention the idea that we're going to retaliate against those who are causing the pain. We're just going to endure the pain because that's our place. Our place is to struggle and to just survive it. We get through it with prayer, and we get our blessing in the afterlife. And every time someone commits another atrocity against our people, we have individuals, again, provided by, sponsored by white supremacy, to remind us of the importance of being passive and nonviolent.
There were a lot of black people who were talking about taking up arms and defending themselves. There was something called the Battle of Hayes Pond that a lot of people don't know about, where black people fought against the Klan and they took up arms against them. So black people were not just taking all these beatings laying down. There were a lot of black people who were fighting back physically against systematic white supremacy.
Just outside of Selma, Alabama, there was a group of black folk who protected the civil rights movement. There was a group of black folk who protected King as they marched from Selma to Montgomery, and these were brothers who called themselves the Black Panthers. They had guns, and they made sure that nothing happened to some of their brothers.
The Deacons had formed to protect civil rights marchers. See, it wasn't just like we got some guns back here. They were actually making sure that if you're going to shoot at these marchers, somebody's going to shoot back at you. And there were other groups like RAMS, the Revolutionary Action Movement, the International Commandos, the Yahudu Fighters. There were some groups out here that was armed, ready, locked, and loaded, and did fight back. There were radio stations blown up in this country in the South that nobody hears about in magazines. There were shootouts in certain parts, and nobody heard about in newspapers.
But if you can't say nonviolence worked because the threat of what the Panthers would do, Black Liberation Army to do, the threat of what them brothers in bow ties might do, they were so organized, had their own economy. And they were nonviolent in themselves, but the threat, that changed things. I'm tired of that chump talk, that sucker talk. And you can't tell me about Selma because I know Reverend Owens. James Orange is my mentor. God bless the dead. You know, I called his wife, told her Happy Mother's Day yesterday. So you can't tell me, because I didn't see it. I didn't read it. I heard the stories from him. I know Andrew Young. You know, I can call him, get him on the phone now. That's what I'm saying. So you can tell them suckers, I know Hosea Williams. Like, I grew up in this city when Hosea Williams hit. If you hit Hosea Williams, he's going to hit you back. Jack.
Robert Smalls and Buford headed a group called the Black Shirt. The Klan manifested in South Carolina originally as the Red Shirts. And so they were marching on Buford, South Carolina, to deal with the black folks who had been doing so well after the Civil War. So Robert Smalls and the black coats, they didn't go after the Red Shirts. They went to the white population in Buford and said, listen here, those are y'all's brothers. Y'all stop them or we stop y'all. Nobody talks about that in the history books.
Man, that's the beautiful thing about the Second Amendment, man. It applies to everybody. See, man, you got to be proud to be American, man. Let me tell you something, man. You will find no prouder American than this black man right here, man, because all those rights are due to me. Now, I might get inconvenienced. You might pull me over, stop me a little longer. You might, but bruh, that gun cleaner than your mama before she met your dad. So at the end of this encounter, officer, you're going to give me that gun back. I'm going to put that gun back on my front seat, and I'm going to balls off on you.
We go back to Nat Turner. He wasn't an anomaly, you know. He was just one of the ones that got recorded. But we've always resisted. And we weren't separated. When Turner was brought up in charge, they asked him, who is your leader? It's got to be somebody behind you. He said, yes, I do have a leader. Who's your leader? He said, Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So the judge said, well, y'all go find that Negro. They went on and come and tell the judge, well, that was the Emperor of Haiti, but he's been dead for years, so they bring Turner back. And so, why are you saying this dead man is your leader? He said, my leader is Jean-Jacques Dessalines. He was talking about the spirit of revolution left by blacks who had resisted by arms before.
They want you to pull your pants up and go into the gas chambers. They want you to act right and walk into your noose. You see, that's all they're asking you to do. And so just even looking at how those phrases are termed, first of all, those are connotative sentences or connotative statements, because you're saying act right. Well, what is right? Because the Europeans shouldn't be the standard for what is right or who sets forth what is right. Given all that they have done, I don't think anybody would say killing and slaughtering and murdering and pillaging and lynching, and those are right things. So when you look at a people and they're telling you, you need to act right, well, I'm not sure that I would know if you even know what's right.
The white supremacists, not only will they target certain black people, they will target their offspring, because they understand that certain bloodlines and certain offspring is passed down. And greatness sometimes is passed down through the bloodline and through families. So a lot of times when you have great black public figures who come out, after they're taken out, a lot of times their family is targeted. Like our brother Malcolm X, when he was taken out, the feds and the powers that be would target his wife, they would target his children, his grandchildren. And Dr. Martin Luther King, when he was taken out, a lot of people don't know that his mother was killed in a church in the early 1970s. She was shot in a church.
A black man rises up and challenges you effectively. First thing that you have to do is take him out and then ensure that his offspring will not follow in their daddy's footsteps. So whatever you can do to destroy the children of that leader sets an example for anybody else who would consider walking his shoes. So it's a war strategy. It's a very effective war strategy. And so if we realize that we are at war and that white supremacy uses any means at their disposal in order to win every battle.
Europeans understand that intelligence is passed down through bloodlines. It's passed down through genetics. So they understand if they want to get rid of revolutionary leaders within a race which they're trying to kill or exterminate, they have to get rid of entire bloodlines. And so in order to do that, they have to not only just attack the spawn or the root, they have to attack every extension off of that spawn or that root.
We think like our slave master. If you want to know how the blacks in Barbados behave, look at the white people that own them. You want to know how the blacks in St. Louis behave, look at the whites who own them. Because they taught us. They taught us how to have children, how to discipline children. They said your children are evil. You have to beat the evil out of them. They were born in evil, beat the evil out of them, beat the hell out of them. See, we were taught their system. The only way for them to control us is for us to act like them. That's the only way they control us.
Now, the month of April has always been a very significant month for the white supremacists. Now, understand that white supremacy is a 24-hour thing. But April is very significant, and you see an increase of violent behavior coming from white supremacist groups because, number one, April is the month of the Patriots' Day, where the so-called patriots, the white supremacists, fought off their enemies. Also, April is the month, the birthday of Hitler. So a lot of the white supremacists, they will time a lot of mass shootings or a lot of mass killings around April. When you look at the Columbine shootings, that shooting was done by two white supremacist teens who timed that specifically for April. The Waco situation, that happened in April. The Boston Marathon bombing, that happened in April. So many actions of the white supremacists and violent acts take place in April. The Oklahoma City bombing, that happened in April. So April is a very significant month for the white supremacists. It's almost like a holy month.
There are things at nighttime, rituals, which we call nocturnal, and we're sun-centered. Our rituals are during the day with the sun. Even if they go to a restaurant, it's going to be dark with candles like a cave. Because that's where they come from. They're bringing their culture with them. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you inflict it on someone else, then there's something wrong. But I'm saying, even today, you can go to the country, you see the name of a bar is called Caverns, Cave. It's not a big thing with the Europeans. So what happened is that they perfected their culture, and we perfected ours of being, sharing with other people. There's no overtaking, nothing in history where we decimated, annihilated a race like the Caribbeans did. There's no history books about that amongst African people, none. But you go into Europeans, you just follow the trail of blood, and you follow their history.
One way that the white supremacists have always been able to subjugate people is by using germ warfare. This started with the Native Americans when they would come around the natives and give them smallpox, and they saw that disease can kill off more people than the gun. So the white supremacists, they've always used disease to decimate people with AIDS, with Ebola, with all types of other diseases so they can kill off the people and take the land, because they understand if you violently try to take people off their land, sometimes you destroy the land. They understood that with Japan. By dropping atom bombs and all this stuff on people, what happens is that you'll kill the people, but then you'll destroy the land, and the land will be useless.
Ebola's in Nigeria. At the same time, Nigeria is supplying 20% of its oil to China, who is our new Russia, who we need to make sure has a cap on how much gas they can use. So now we got troops in Nigeria just chilling. And the reason is Ebola. We got troops in the Eastern Horn of Africa because there are skirmishes and there are pirates there. It looks to me, though, that's the only place fuel can go in and out of by ship. So in case it ever gets stupid, then you know who can close it off. So I just look at the world from a bigger context.
And scientists now have so perfected this art of germ warfare that they have developed melanin-specific viruses. And our pneumonia has been spreading throughout the black community. The pneumonia virus has mutated to the point now where it used to be cured with an injection 10 years ago. Now there's so many forms of pneumonia out here that are taking people out left and right.
Working with Tulane University and Columbia University, have a lab in all three of those countries that's producing bacterial warfare. And one of the things they're producing is Ebola. And the CDC owns the patent on this Ebola virus that just wreaked havoc over West Africa.
I remember reading in the Washington Post magazine about 15 years ago about an article, a CIA agent who was in Africa, and he had an assignment, and something went wrong, and he decided to scrap this assignment, and he threw this suitcase that was filled with the Ebola virus in a lake, threw it away. And then a short time later, Ebola breaks out in that community. So these mysterious viruses that just show up and only seem to target specific people, we have to begin to recognize that as a potential form of genetic warfare.
The most modern instance is the Ebola situation in West Africa. Ebola jumped from the Congo to West Africa and missed all those other countries. That was a flying virus. It must have took wings.
ISIS is not only a political and economic scheme, but a spiritual scheme based on a metaphysical level, because now they're taking the name of our ancient African goddess and they're framing it in terms of malevolence, as though it's bad. So, you know, when African people start to promote African culture more and the name of ISIS is being spewed into the atmosphere, you know, just through us revering that spiritual system of ancient Kemet, white people who may over here say, oh, ISIS, and thinking that we're terrorists, so they're indirectly associating those things and making them overlap, even though one is created by them and for malevolent means, and one is in reverence of our culture.
Shell isn't going to stop building pipes there. British Petroleum's not going to stop laying pipes because of an Ebola outbreak. So the question becomes to me, like, is there for real? Are we knocking people off? And people, then they say you're a conspiracy theorist, but my great-grandfather's father was a part of the Tuskegee experiment. So yeah, I believe in conspiracy theories because it has affected my life. So you got to start asking yourself, if a disease just pops up out of nowhere again and again, and the people are dying, but yet their land is needed for oil, what's, you know, one of many things could be happening. What I do know is I don't buy what they tell me on TV.
They used the syphilis on us. And people think, oh, they just took a couple people and gave them syphilis. No. What they did, they infected men with syphilis, and then they let them go without treatment, without even knowing they have syphilis, to spread it to their wives and their girlfriends, and thus throughout the black community for decades, while they studied the effects of syphilis on the human body by guinea pigging these Africans. That was just one instance right here in the United States.
The medicines that Africans have been using for hundreds of years are known to the Western world. You get in the bush and you'll find folk who, I remember when I was in Ethiopia back in 1985 and met this Ethiopian herbologist who had a cure for cancer. And he showed us his patients. He showed us before and after pictures of him curing cancer cells on people's bodies by using specific herbs. And he talked about the differences between using certain herbs that are designed to kill certain diseases and certain viruses, as opposed to pharmaceutically produced chemicals that will kill certain viruses, but they have side effects. So you take other medications for the side effects, but these specific herbs are targeted only to focus on certain cancers or certain diseases and take them out without affecting other parts of the body. Those herbologists, those scientists, those chemists still exist in Africa today.
People living about 150, 200 easy, 200 years old. The health was superior. You wouldn't go to Africa and get somebody with arthritis, rheumatism, diabetes to pick your damn cotton. I mean, that's absurd. You wouldn't get some healthy people because you're trying to make some money. So you went there for that.
White supremacists, they would take the skin of African slaves and actually make shoes out of them. This is something that they don't like to talk about. Even today, there's a company over in Europe that makes shoes and leather products based on human skin. Right now, to this day, they make leather products based on human skin.
Our communities are ridden with products that have GMOs. More likely to find products with GMOs in our supermarkets in our neighborhoods than you will in other neighborhoods. And why are GMOs critical? Because it's been shown not only are they cancerous, but they destroy nervous system tissues, they destroy brain tissue, and so they impede our cognitive development. So we have to begin to be more concerned about nutrition.
You have power when you can control your eating capacity. When you got to depend on Piggly Wiggly or Stop and Shop or any of the other supermarkets for your food, I don't care how many millions you have, if you can't grow your own food, you don't have power. Power is the ability to eat. So even if you got that little garden in your backyard or on your windowsill in a project and you're growing your own food, you have power. Because if all those stores shut down, you can continue to eat, and in continuing to eat, you can continue to live.
white supremacists will say and do anything in order to get one up on melanated people. They will lie, steal, kill, cheat, whatever it takes. This is why many of the white supremacists will renege on all of the treaties that they've agreed to, because African people and melanated people don't really know exactly what they're dealing with. They don't understand that there is no honor system with the white supremacists.
So we have to go back into their history like they go into our history. You understand? They have more books about Egyptian and our history than we do. So to understand black people, you have to go into African history. And to understand Europeans, you have to go into the cave history and cave civilization. White supremacy was not used. It's just a system they use to protect themselves. And to protect yourself, you have to develop deceit and deception.
They love us in the sense that, not in the sense that they respect us or want to treat us fairly, but they love us the way a master loves his dog. You know, like they don't, you know, the dog can be almost like a member of the family, but they'll never let the dog sit down at the dinner table. They'll never treat the dog as if he's as important as one of the members of that family, right? But if the dog tries to run away, they'll go chase the dog down. You know, you know, you kill the dog, they're gonna be sad about it. And I think that white people, historically, have always seen us as part of their infrastructure, you know, going back to slavery. I mean, you needed your slaves because you were making money from your slaves. You need your slaves to nurse your children.
In order to maintain your power, you perpetuate the weakest of a culture and make them look like the strongest and have the sheep follow. And you'll always keep them down. You take the dominant culture and you say to them, all right, these individuals are getting an education, they're developing pride, they're coming out with dignity, they're looking out for their mothers, their sisters, their wives, their girlfriends. We have to do something about that. That's too good. We don't want them to understand the value of those kinds of things, those kind of actions. So we have to use our propaganda to point these guys as rebel rousers and these individuals as heroes. So if you look at who is put in front of the black community, it is usually those after